I'm Gerald Howard. I'm on the board of this August institution, and it's my keen and special pleasure to welcome my one-time publishing colleague and my longtime friend Amanda Vaill to the Tuxedo Park Library to converse with her about her terrific new book, Pride and Pleasure: The Schuyler Sisters in an Age of Revolution. So back in the 80s, Amanda and I both worked at Viking Penguin as youngish editors, and exciting, sometimes a little too exciting, and an absolutely formative time for both of us in our publishing careers. We had a lot of fun, didn't we, Amanda? And then she made a very high profile mid-career shift and has become one of our most skilled biographers and nonfiction writers, with 4 extravagantly admired books to her credit, including Everybody Was So Young, about lost generation icons Gerald and Sarah Murphy, Somewhere, the definitive biography of the great and complicated choreographer Jerome Robbins, which I edited.
Gerald Howard.
Hotel Florida, a portrait of, among others, Ernest Hemingway, Martha Gellhorn, and the photographers Robert Capa and Gerda Harrow, and their journalistic adventures during the Spanish Civil War. And now Pride and Pleasure, which was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award in biography. I have read slowly, carefully, and admiringly Pride and Pleasure, and I want to say that it brings the reader into the lives of the revolutionary generation of Americans with such richness of detail and such authority and virtuosity that I think it sets a new standard in the field. I don't know about you, but in my education, phrases like the committees of correspondence and the Stamp Act used to land in my brain like an injection of Novocaine. Amanda's book, in contrast, gives us the great figures of our history and the supporting players, known and underknown, with all their humanity and their flaws intact. And the Schuyler sisters, as we'll see, proved to be like the perfect human thread or conduits for the larger story of our country's founding. So one reader has described Pride and Pleasure as Tolstoyan, which sets the bar pretty damn high. I myself am inclined to describe the experience of reading her book with the fancy French term roman fleuve, a nonfiction novel in which the incidents, large and small, of life flow before the reader like an unending stream. It's a tremendous achievement in in terms of scholarship, narrative craft, and interest, human interest. So we'll conversate for 45 or 50 minutes and then open the floor for questions from our physical audience and also our virtual one. You folks out there can use the chat button on your Zoom page. Books, as always, are available for purchase. And really, what better gift for both mothers and fathers who can read can there be? This is a dad book for moms and a mom book for dads.
What a publisher.
Yeah, well, old habits, right?
Yeah.
You can tell for our Strauss and
We
Ruth.
can do it.
Yeah. So, Amanda, welcome. And why don't you begin by, you can applaud if you with the bow, and why don't you read a page or two of your opus to set the stage and the tone?
Okay. Well, I'm going to read a small passage from fairly early in the book, which takes place after Eliza and Alexander Hamilton have become married. Hamilton has recently left Washington's staff. Meanwhile, her sister Angelica has eloped with a man by the name of John Carter, who is selling goods to the French armies headquartered in Newport, which is where Angelica and John Carter have been living. But they've all come home, or are about to come home, to the Schuyler family mansion in Albany, which was built by Philip Schuyler, the paterfamilias of this book. And I think I've now said everybody's saying that I need to say, so that you will not be bewildered, except for, oh yes, there is Angelica's two little children, Philip and her new baby, Lady Kitty, or Catherine. June 1781. Angelica kisses her husband goodbye and sets off for Albany with little Philip and her sister, who has already acquired the imperious demeanor that has earned her the nickname Lady Kitty. The French army is leaving Newport, so Angelica will be staying in Albany at least until her confinement, while John Carter travels with Rochambeau to Dobbs Ferry to rendezvous with Washington and his forces. Her father has been planning to come fetch her and the children himself, but he has been suffering from the quinsy and couldn't make the journey. And instead, he was sent their coachman, Lewis, with the luxuriously sprung Schuyler carriage, because in Angelica's condition, the trip will be tiring. She's well into her 5th month of pregnancy, and probably all she wants to do is sleep, not jumps along a rutted road with 2 children under the age of 4, even if their nursemaid accompanies them. Arriving in Albany on the 7th, she's delighted to be reunited with her family. For all her headstrong qualities, she loves her parents dearly and surely welcomes the thaw that has developed between them and her husband. She eloped with him, and there was a huge scene. Our joy is increased when toward the end of the month, Eliza and Hamilton join the family party. Since Washington has decamped from New Windsor to Dobbs Ferry, there's no longer any reason for them to stay on at De Peyster's Point, but it seems as if the family reunion may be short-lived. Although Hamilton's been positioning himself through his writing for a possible career in government, Philip Schuyler's meeting with the state legislatures earlier in the month hasn't resulted in the hoped-for appointment of his son-in-law to the army, to Congress, and Hamilton himself is still pining for a field command in the army. Now that he's brought Eliza safely to her parents' house, he says, he plans to go to Washington's headquarters and stay until he's persuaded the general to give him the post he wants. The French and Americans are contemplating an attack on New York that might well strike the decisive blow in the war, and it may be Hamilton's last chance to get in on the fight. Angelica, for whom the glittering prizes of fame never seem to lose their luster, applauds Hamilton's enterprise immediately. She is, as she puts it, very anxious for your happiness and glory. But Eliza is bitterly and tearfully opposed. It's all very well for Angelica to be supportive. Her husband won't be exposed to enemy fire. It's useless for Hamilton to protest that since there's little prospect of activity, there won't be any danger, or to claim that it cost me a great deal to be absent from the delights of our marriage bed, or to swear that only her love makes life of any value to me. She's completely overcome with grief at the prospect of parting with him. Except for his brief trip to Newport in March, they've been together most of every day and every night of their brief marriage, and she's desolate when she imagines that they might never be together again. Why doesn't she play the most powerful card in her possession and tell him that she suspects she is pregnant? Perhaps she isn't sure, or fears that things will go awry, as she knows they sometimes do. Or perhaps she doesn't want to force him to make a choice that will be hurtful to her, more hurtful than his leaving in ignorance would be. So she says nothing. And in the first week of July, Hamilton mounts the new horse that Philip Schuyler has given him, murmurs, "Be as happy as you can, my beloved wife," into Eliza's ear, and rides south to Dobbs Ferry.
Really makes you want to see the movie, right?
If only.
Yeah. So we'll begin. I have heard that the most anxiety-producing process in the life of a nonfiction writer, book writer, is deciding on a subject for your next book. So how did the Schuyler sisters, Angelica and Eliza, swim into view and capture your attention. What made you, as you said to another interviewer, quote, desperate, so desperate to claim them? Um,
Well, it's kind of like seeing somebody else looking at something and thinking, no, 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 you can't have it, it's mine. I had read Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton when I was deep in the process of writing Hotel Florida, my book about the Spanish Civil War, and I was not looking for other subjects. And I thought, as I read, oh, these two women are awfully interesting, but nobody knows anything about them. Why hasn't anyone written about them? Somebody should write a book about them. It's a great idea. And this, we were editors for a long time and we think about things like
yeah,
that.
the impulse.
Yeah, that'd make a great book.
Yeah, somebody else will do it. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I thought. And then idea went out of my head. And a couple years later, I finished my book. I'm thinking about something else. I can't come up with a subject. I've been trying for months and I'm feeling sort of semi-desperate. And I go to see a musical at the Public Theater by a young man whose work I've been very interested in for a number of years, called Hamilton. It is a rap musical about Alexander Hamilton, supposedly based on Ron Chernow's biography. And lo and behold, I'm in the Newman Theater for about 20 minutes in the last week of their performances off Broadway. And I see these two women and I suddenly realize this story has got legs. Yeah. Oh, what a subject. And that was when that awful, acquisitive, selfish, territorial writer's desire kicked in. I just thought, I don't want anyone else to get this. I want it. And I called up Eric, our agent, now he's sharing agent, and said, what do you think I should do? And he said, you better write that proposal fast. Because this show is gonna open on Broadway, and when it does, it's gonna be huge, and everybody in America is gonna want to write this book.
So that,
So I got to work.
a practical consideration is you can sell it to your publisher too.
Yeah.
You have something to work with. Well, it worked out very well. Let's just take in the larger picture first that your book paints before we get into the particulars. Tell us about the Schuyler family. They're a Hudson Valley dynasty. They're patroons. You told me that they spoke Dutch at home, and they were intimately involved in every aspect of the founding of this country.
They were, as we all know, the Dutch were the first to settle New York State, and after the English took over, what was interesting is that the Schuylers were among those who embraced their new masters, the English, and Philip Schuyler became, in some ways, more English than the English, sent his daughters to school in New York to learn to be proper, well brought up English ladies, and pretty much tried to do the same thing with the sons, though they were somewhat more problematic. He was married to
Rensselaer, yeah.
definitely, yes. And well, she was Catherine Van Rensselaer, and she was of the sort of cadet branch of the Van Rensselaer family, but not.
People used to think like that.
It's not shabby, not a shabby. Between them, they own vast tracts of land on both sides of the Hudson River. Not as much as the main branch of the Van Rensselaer family did, which they owned practically all of New York State, but they were not shabby. And they had a beautiful, big English-style mansion house in Albany, which was their main base, and which was the place that Albany was where Philip Schuyler's business empire had been based to begin with. He had flax mills on the Upper Hudson. He had farms, and he had fur pelts. He had timber lots. He had, grain. He had all kinds. He had many, many different kinds of sort of agriculturally based products, which he was selling, and he traded them. He was a very, very wealthy man. They had also, although they did not own a house in New York City, they rented them, and they traveled back and forth on the Hudson River sloop, which was kind of like the Hampton Jitney. It just went back and forth all the time with all the the people that you would hobnob with, they hobnobbed with them.
And just to say that Philip Schuyler was a major player in New York and national politics
Yeah.
and in when the
He was
Revolutionary
a state
War kicks
legislator,
off.
and he'd also been an officer in the French and Indian War, as we used to call it. And so he was a legislator, he was a member of the councils, so he was a protester against the Stamp Act and against the various intolerable acts that, including the ones that put taxes on tea.
So these are not the hoi polloi, these are the
Hoi
quality.
polloi.
Yeah, these are. So there's quite a lot of births, fantastically fertile people in this book, by the way. They're uh, but they begin to reproduce, and their first child is Angelica Schuyler, the eldest
Born
daughter.
5 months after her parents were married.
There's a lot of that too, yeah.
Just
She's I mean, she's one of the magnetic centers of this book. She's a beauty. She's a virtuoso operator, I would say, in the realm of high society and the haute mode in 2 continents, and um, put her in our mind, in our minds.
Angelica, well, she was the eldest of this entire brood of children. There were 8 surviving Schuyler children, but there were 5 who died in infancy or very young childhood.
There's a lot of disease and mortality in
A lot of, and it's the whole thing, when you think about medical care and maternal care, that doesn't bear thinking about us. So, so Angelica is number 1. She is really an alpha female. She is the girl who gets her own way all the time. She is the one who gets to go to New York first and stay with her friend, the daughter of the governor. And she gets the huge new wardrobe to go with it. She's the one, she wants to be a star always. She's a very attention needy girl, and she's very flirtatious, and she's the one that the guys, if you go to the dance, she's the one they all want to ask to dance first. She's the one with a full dance card. Her second sibling is Elizabeth, Betsy, as she's called as a child. She's a year younger, she's a bit more than a year younger. Betsy is not any less witty in her sort of dry way. She's a very dry sense of humor, Betsy does, which you don't see so much, but it comes out in the letters that survive of hers. Angelica is pushes herself forward more. Betsy does not push herself forward. Betsy, however, is one of these people. She could never be a flirt because she cannot lie. She must tell truth. So if she thinks you look terrible in that new hat you just bought, or that coat is just the wrong color, she will tell you. And this is not what a flirt does. So the 2 of them are quite different in that way.
Well, it is in one sense a story of sibling rivalry, writ large and interesting. And maybe let's talk about the 2 husbands now. Angelica makes what seems at first to be a kind of brilliant marriage, at least in terms of the money coming into a guy named John Carter, who's getting rich supplying the American and French troops during the Revolution. There's a phrase from World War II, the feather merchants. He's kind of a feather merchant, but he was also, I'm really fascinated by this guy. He's also what you call a chancer. He's a war profiteer, he's a bankrupt, he's an imposter, and somebody called him a prating coxcomb, which So I'm gonna call somebody a
future
braiding
president
costume
of the United
someday.
States called him a braiding costume.
Yeah, so tell us a little about it. I mean, that's the guy, right?
Yeah, that's definitely the guy. Well, he shows up in Albany. He's an accountant, or he claims to be an accountant. He's actually this bankrupt businessman, but nobody knows. He's fled to America to avoid bankruptcy proceedings, but nobody knows it. And he manages to get a position auditing accounts for the Continental Congress. And the Continental Congress wants to have Philip Schuyler's accounts audited as his military accounts, because they're wondering if there isn't fraud, waste, and abuse going on in Schuyler's back counting house. So they send this guy, John Carter, to go and look it up. Well, what John Carter sees when he gets to Albany is Philip Schuyler's eldest daughter, who is very beautiful and very wealthy, and in Dutch law, women get to inherit as much as their male siblings. So this looks like a really golden opportunity. And he romances her. Philip Schuyler, he asks to pay his addresses to her. Schuyler says, "We know nothing of you or your family. We don't know who you are. I will not allow you to pay your addresses to my daughter." And Angelica schemes with John Carter, aka behind the scenes, to elope, which she does. And there is a cute scene. The family are
Massachusetts being conveniently just.
oh yeah, they
have,
run across, and then they run back.
very good marriage laws if you're eloping.
But there's all of this. They do a really there's a huge scene in the family. Philip Schuyler does what he always does when his children make a match that he doesn't approve of, which is, "I'll never speak to you again." A week goes by. I'm very hurt by this, and I'm very angry, and if you apologize, then we can be friends. A week after that, would like to buy you a set of china. What pattern do you want? This is exactly what happens in every single case. So it starts out with Angelica, and Angelica does this. Then Carter, who was under an assumed name because he's fled bankruptcy, makes all these millions of dollars with the American and French armies. The French and the Americans beat the Brits. The time has come for Carter to recoup his large debt. And in order to do so, he takes Angelica across the ocean and they go to France so that he can go to the court of Louis XIV and say, "Here's the bill, pay up, sucker." And indeed, that is what happens. But parenthetically, so little is left in the French exchequer after he has done this, that the French government has to call the Estates General in order to raise new taxes. And the next thing that happens is the tennis court oath and the French Revolution. So John Carter, in a way, is responsible for the French.
I love this guy. I love this guy.
He is also a fierce Jacobin. He's a Whig, and is a Jacobin. He manages to go back to England because now he's got so much money that he doesn't know what to do with it, and says, "Ha! Here I am. I'm not dead after all," because he told everybody he was dead, or he let people believe he was dead. And he pays off his debts and
becomes a man of quality.
A man of property.
Yes.
They get a house on the Thames where they entertain the Prince of Wales. He buys enormous numbers of racehorses. He goes and he gambles like crazy with all of the people that hang around the Prince of Wales, who are quite a fast set of gamblers. He has a fancy mistress who he keeps somewhere. And he just is a disgraceful person, really.
That's why I like him, yeah.
And he wants to run for Parliament. Where, says Angelica to Hamilton, "I would rejoice to see him if he had your brains."
Right. Well, there's the third guy. The third, and this is in a way, it's a triangle. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but anyway. A triptych. So Eliza makes a brilliant marriage too. But he's a penniless bastard.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like a brilliant.
Alexander Hamilton was a illegitimate child from St. Croix, I think.
Yeah, well, he was born on Nevins, but
No,
grew up on St. Croix.
an orphan, I guess, by the time.
Well,
he fell.
ultimately, his orphan, his father had sort of drifted on. He was a drifter who drifted on and was not present for his upbringing. The mother died of horrible tropical fever with little Alexander in the bed with her, also suffering from tropical fever. It was the most nightmarish thing possible. He, I think, lied about his age so that he wouldn't get sent to an orphanage, which is one of the reasons, which is my theory about why there's been some question about, was he 3 years older than his age, than he says he is, or not? And I think he says he's 3 years older so that he can get to not have to be sent to an orphanage. But at any rate, he manages to get himself a job as a teenager in a counting house of a mercantile corporation that has offices in New York and in St. Croix. People in St. Croix take up a collection to send him to further his education in the great United colonies, and or the non-United in the colonies, and he comes to Columbia University, or then King's College,
Right.
and becomes a student.
Downtown too.
The war comes,
Yeah.
he enlists, he ends up on Washington's staff, although it was not his first, he began as a combat in the artillery division. He ends up on Washington's staff, and Eliza, in the incredibly cold winter of 1780, when her older sister is married, and there's not a lot of action socially in Albany, New York at that time. She wants to have fun, so she goes to visit her aunt and uncle in Morristown, New Jersey, where her uncle is the physician in charge of the colonial army, the Continental Army, and at the dancing assembly that they have there, that all the young officers go to, who she meets but Alexander Hamilton, and bing, they fall in love with each other.
I mean, in material terms, he brings very little to the marriage.
It was
Nothing like
buckets.
like zip.
Yeah,
But it's quite obvious that he's the smartest person in whatever room he's going to be in, and he's the coming man.
and she convinces her father, you have to let us get married. She's not going to run off like Angelica did. In part, I think this is not a dumb girl, and I'm sure she understood that that would really have sunk Hamilton. He didn't have anything. He had nothing to recommend him. He would really, this would have been if she'd run off and they had been in disgrace, it would have been not a good thing for him. So she gets Schuyler to say, yo, well, if your mother will go along with this, and then the mother goes along with it. So everybody's happy. And in the end, Phil Schuyler loved.
Yeah, the old man really liked.
He loved Alexander Hamilton more than he loved any of his children or any of his sons.
So here we come to the sibling rivalry part of this book. Angelica, they say that some men had eyes for horse flesh. Well, Angelica had an eye for whoever was in the room was with the most action, the most charisma, and she really loves her brother-in-law too. You refer in the book, this is a nice phrase, her lifetime efforts to position herself at the center of great events. And her nose is twitching that a lot of those great events are going to involve her brother-in-law, and they start writing some letters to each other. Tell us about the correspondence between Alexander Hamilton and Angelica Church.
Well, it begins as flirtatious correspondence because, of course, Angelica was a renowned flirt, and Hamilton had been taught by the best. Catherine Livingston, the daughter of Governor Livingston of New Jersey, with a famous flirt, they had written flirty letters to one another, and she was an older woman, an older girl, and he was a young boy living in her father's house some of the time. So Angelica and Helen start out this kind of flirty correspondence. And then
It's almost like a ritual in a
Yeah.
way at first.
then something happens. And what Angelica moves to England with her husband. And at one time, it's thought that this is gonna be a short, just a jaunt. They're gonna go over, they're gonna come back. This is just in order for him to settle his affairs, and then he'll come back with all of his moolah and settle in America. But when Hamilton learns that they're supposedly never coming back, that at this point, John, now Church, that is his real name, John Church is going to stay in England with his wife Angelica. Hamilton writes her this grief-stricken letter in which he says he sees one great source of happiness dashed away. He is
You don't usually say to your
a
sister-in-law.
really strange thing to write your sister-in-law. So at this point, they're distant from one another. They keep writing back and forth. He writes her letters with, weird commas in them. So he'll say, adieu, ma chère, comma, sir. Goodbye, my dear sister. And more of this goes on. At one point, he says to her, they start riddling back and forth with these exams. So they're flirting by letter, but it's only by letter. And then she comes back to America in 1789 for Washington's inauguration, and she stays for 6 months, during which time Hamilton and Angelica are alone for various periods, long periods, in New York City, while Eliza and her then very small children are upstate with the family in Albany.
So there's this more than a little jaw-dropping moment where Angelica writes to Eliza, and so you're gonna have to help me here. She makes reference to a Roman.
I love your husband very much, and if you were as generous as the old Romans, you would share him with me for a little while. That's what she says.
Sis.
I like that doll, give it to me. Give me that doll, I want it. And that's the alpha sister, she's doing that. And this happens. It's sort of inconceivable. What they're over here for this period, she's here for this period of time. She goes back to London. She writes Hamilton this letter. After she gets back to England, she says, I think I must seem to you like someone you have seen in a dream and can scarcely believe. And would you write that to your book?
So it's to the point here that in actual fact, Hamilton was capable of extramarital hanky-panky. He gets caught in this. I mean, this was a guy who controversy followed. I'll have to look around there. John Adams has says you have no moral principles whatsoever, or something like that.
Adams he had a lively imagination. Also.
Yeah, but anyway, Hamilton did get caught in this honey trap. As they say in the spy thrillers, and a blackmail scheme, which eventually came out. So it is not very far out of the range of possibility that something more than really well-written letters.
The tone of the letters changes so significantly between the early flirty ones and the kind of heavy breathing ones. There's also a point at which Angelica writes him, says, I have saved every letter you wrote me since I have been here, and I reread them all in one day, and I can't stop crying.
So this makes it fun. I want to get. I want to.
He loves his wife, by the way, and she loves him.
Yeah,
it's really weird.
But there's such richness in this book. It would make it seem like it's like a little like a romance. novel, and there's something in there. But, what, so it's such a pleasure to read this book and I want to talk about the pleasures that I experienced. And the first thing that I was struck over and over by the sheer density of detail about the material world that the Schuylers and everyone else inhabited in this drama. And especially, you're so specific about matters of fashion, architecture, decor, social niceties, and all of that. And why was, I mean, some of this, you have to take this as a compliment, would feel very comfortable in El Decor, or is it? You understand that that's a compliment,
Yes, I
okay?
do.
What, why were these details so important for you to get right, and what were your sources for them and all of that?
Well, I believe that if you're gonna thoroughly inhabit a historical era, you have to know what's on the walls, you have to know what's on the table, you have to know what's on the back, people's backs. You have to know what kind of underwear they're wearing, and let me tell you, women do not wear anything under their chemises. So, just, something I found out when I was doing this book. It makes perfect sense when you start to think about it. And you just have to know these things. You have to know what the weather was like, if you possibly can find out. You have to, all of those things, they give density and weight to your historical recreation. They help you understand what people are thinking and why they act the way they do. It feels to me, and I was incredibly lucky that a lot of the archives that I consulted were rich with this material. The Phillips Schuyler papers at the New York Public Library has pages and pages of household inventories, shipping inventories of the Hudson River sloops that were bringing goodies to the Schuyler house in Albany from New York. There's one big load of stuff, it's coconuts and Madeira wine and this, I mean, you just suddenly,
Lisa, the people that you're writing about are not hardy yeoman farmers.
No.
They live, they live at the same level of luxury, that the folks in Europe. There's a lot of goods. So, this, I'm going to talk about feminine history and your approach to it. Now, this is Pride and Pleasure is a book about world-shaping events, and it must have been a temptation to write this from what I would call a feminist perspective, to assert that the Schuyler women had been written out of their rightful role in these events. You don't do that, though. I think you do something better and harder. You place the role of these women in their revolutionary times in proper perspective. It's you use the phrase about another narrative hidden beneath the surface. It's a very tricky thing to pull off, and just tell us about your aims and your guiding principles in writing this kind of history.
well, if the book opens with a spoiler, which is Hamilton's death, and his funeral. And at his deathbed, and at his funeral, Angelica and Eliza, the two most important women, and maybe the two most important people in his life, except for maybe Washington, were pushed to one side totally and ignored, literally written out of the story. And it is seemed to me to be something I needed to put them back into the story, but not by claiming some kind of faux importance for them, that they really were behind this or this thing, or they really did that. I wanted instead to kind of change the perspective so that you look at the history through, from their perspective, from the women's end of the telescope, and you see events as they would have seen them, instead of putting them back in the picture by claiming influence that they didn't have. You put them back in the picture by looking at the picture from where they looked at it. So when Hamilton goes off to Yorktown, we're not just hearing about Yorktown, we're hearing about how his wife feels about his going, and about how his sister-in-law also feels about his doing this. And those are two very different things. That's how, I'm putting them back that way.
It's really hard, it's really difficult to keep all of these things in proper balance. And you do it, by the way, I want to say parenthetically, those of you who are lucky enough to go into New York on Coach USA buses, I mean, twice a day I would go through Weehawken, and I think, where did Aaron Burr shoot Alexander Hamilton?
Right there.
And I still don't know.
Weehawken, somewhere down by the road.
But, so Angelica, I would say, takes up an awful lot of oxygen in real life and in the book, but uh, she died in her 50s.
15, yeah.
Yeah, Eliza in contrast was very long-lived into her 90s. She was a long-distance runner in her family, and she accomplished a lot after Hamilton and her sister died. And why don't you just tell us some of the things that she did? She comes into her own, I think, is a fair statement.
Angelica, just quickly, I just want to say one thing about Angelica too, is that she always fixed her star to a famous man. She saw her birth and her importance as being determined by her relationship to a man. And in the end, the two men that she most trusted with us, her husband, turned out to be a complete jerk and bankrupted a second time, by the way.
Well,
So,
you get better at it.
he got really bad at it. And Hamilton, of course, ends up getting killed. So that was not cool. And she's left without a rudder.
An anchor, yeah.
And
Or some other
Eliza, some other novel. Eliza, by contrast, was always trying to do what she felt she should do. And when Hamilton died, she was at first overcome with grief, so much so that she was practically suicidal. She wrote a letter to her brother-in-law, to her brother, in which she basically says, I want to die now. And the only reason I'm not dying is that I have children, I have to support them. 4 months later, she
That
was
was a
like,
problem too, by the way. Yeah, Hamilton died with a lot of
he
debt.
was in debt and she had to dig herself out of that. But 4 months later, she is writing her brother, who says, I think you should sell this land that you have. And she says, no, actually, I have been looking at the prices, and I think the market is sufficiently depressed that this is not a good time to do it, but maybe we should revisit this in 6 months. And I'm thinking, this woman has got such strength, and she's smart. She's a smart cookie. She co-founded the first private orphanage in New York City. That was not a church thing. It was a private orphanage organization called the Orphan Asylum Association. And it is still extant today in Grand Wyndham, which is a family, began as an orphanage, but it became a family services charity. But it's still around today. She founded the Hamilton Free School in Upper Manhattan to provide education for kids who couldn't get an education otherwise. Her own children had been mostly educated in private school until there was no more money, but she did this for the kids of laborers and stuff who were living in her neighborhood. Despite of the prevailing political opinion, which was very anti-Hamilton, anti-federalist, anti-everything he'd ever done, she arranged to have his biography written so that he would not be forgotten.
By her son, yeah.
And it ended up being written by her son, but she tried all these other people. These forces kept dropping out from under her, and she ended up getting her son to do it. She collected all of Hamilton's papers, and this was maybe the most stunning thing at all. She tracked them down. She went to Mount Vernon and copied letters. She did all of this and sold them to the Library of Congress in 1848, so that the nation would have a record of what he had been and done. And otherwise, he would have been nothing. We wouldn't remember him.
I mean, it's really interesting when we were studying American history. Hamilton was not the most magnetic thing. Oh yeah, he started the Bank of America. Wow, that's exciting. You know, but he's the real dark horse of the founding fathers.
He put the institutions.
I mean, he created the possibility for this country to be the mercantile, excuse the term, capitalist success.
Without Hamilton, it's entirely possible this country would have failed.
Yeah, financially.
And it ended up basically doing what George III in Hamilton the musical says, you're to be big. Well, yeah.
So before we go to questions, I wanted one last question for you about style in writing. Now, I mean, this book quotes a great deal from correspondence and newspaper articles, and I mean, these people were masters of language. I mean, the richness that was at their command when use of language is just stunning. And I thought I noticed that some of their language was, you were picking up some of the cadences, certainly the vocabulary. Were you aware of this?
Oh, I was very aware of it. I actually, fun fact, when I started this book, I spent some time imagining it written as a sort of a pastiche in faux 18th century prose with chapters again in which happens, as if it were, Tom Jones but nonfiction. And it was fun, but I just thought 300 or 400 plus pages of this, it's not going to happen.
And it also would be distancing from it.
It would be very distancing, and also kind of solipsistic. It would be like, oh, look at me do this. And I wanted the story to show. But what else I wanted to do, as I wrote it, what I wanted to do was not to have the letters and the diaries and the other things that I quoted just poking out like sore thumbs from the prose. I wanted the prose to be hospitable and sympathetic, and so organically it should feel like it's all part of a whole. And so I tried not to use words that were really modern. I tried not to use phraseology that was really up to the minute. I just thought that would be jarring.
It was a great pleasure to see the word cynosure mentioned. Oh, and there's another really good word, a French word. One of the other ones I want to use in conversation someday, make an ass of myself. Tone, T-O-N. I took that to mean the quality.
Well, it means, yes, it's the upper crust and fashion, the tone. And if anyone in this room has ever read Georgette Heyer's novels, which I loved as a young woman, I still love, you will recognize Georgette Heyer throughout this book, because she was a big stylistic influence on me, in that she wrote these wonderful Regency romances that were as if they might have been written by somewhat jazzier Jane Austen. And but they all use words like ton and tonish, so I use them because Did you know that there's almost also no, I'm trying, the word glamour and glamorous, there's almost no synonyms for that.
It's not the world I live in. Like a factory.
What else can I say?
I'm gonna prove you wrong.
You just killed me.
Anyway, what I wanna say is, of the multiple pleasures of Pride and Pleasure, style is one of them, and, so I just, congratulations. I think we can open it up to questions from the floor. Yeah, yes.
So you've spent a lot of time with these three people.
Yes.
What do you imagine would have happened had you not died?
What would happen in,
Had you not been killed?
well, by the time Hamilton dies in 1804, he'd had a deep political disappointment and really disgrace, which was that not only had he admitted to adultery in the Reynolds affair in order to clear his name, make it apparent that he was not a corrupt politician, he was just an adulterer. But he'd also gone after John Adams, which was not cool, and which helped to really get him in the doghouse with the Federalists. And he was pretty washed up as a politician. And one of the things that I think kind of cooled Angelica on him was that he was all of a sudden not a hot property anymore. And she got kind of distant with him towards the end, just kind of.
What does it?
I think what would have happened is that he would have gone on making money as a lawyer. He would have tried to influence politics, which he could never stay away from. He just loved the game so much. But the tide had moved away. You know, the Democratic Republicans controlled the country, and the Federalists became more and more irrelevant as time went on. So he would have, I think he just would have dwindled, and he might have become kind of old fuddy-duddy, you know,
And do you
and
think
that's
the
kind of
relationship-
makes me feel sad.
Do you think the relationship with Eliza would have stayed as?
Oh, he loved her and vice versa. I mean, one of the interesting things there is that their letters to each other. You read other 18th century letters between husbands and wives, and especially husbands will sign off themselves off by saying, you know, affectionately yours, John Jay. And Helen writes, you're my darling wife. He asks Eliza, have you weaned the baby yet? Because I really need to get back together with you. And, you know, he, at one point, he writes her when he goes off to war in the revolution. He describes her as a woman I love almost to weakness, who feels the same ardency for me that I do for her. Well, you know, he's not saying this to her because he's making it up. There's something they had a very, very demonstrative relationship. And she never married again. And that is another really important thing. Women always married again. And she was broke. She needed money, but she could have married somebody with dough who would have bailed her out and educated her kids and done all that, but she wouldn't do it. And she kept this poem that Hamilton wrote to her. She kept it in this little fabric bag that she'd made for it. She kept it on a thread around her neck, under her dress until the day she died. You know, she really, really loved him. So no, she was never gonna, you know, if they would have stayed together, and maybe he would have been an old, you know, oh, how old fashioned Hamilton is, you know, he's this kind, because he was, he would still wear the tailcoat, and he still dressed his hair in the way that people did when everybody else was going over to tie his crop or whatever now on him. So, you know, maybe that's what he would have come, and maybe it was best. I don't thankfully don't saying this, but he was cut down in his prime or just past his prime. And so we still think of him as this kind of romantic figure. Yes.
Of course, back there,
Yeah, you kind of answered the question I was gonna ask, not being married after Hamilton dies. That's like Janet Montgomery, the wife of Richard Montgomery, she didn't remarry either.
She did it well, she loved him, and he was a very glamorous figure. And Janet Montgomery was a great woman, and she was so brave when the Brits came and tried to turf her out of her house. No, and Montgomery was a great hero to the Schuyler family. Because he was, had married the Livingstons, and the Livingstons were their cousins, so they were all like related. But he was when he was killed, it was a disaster to the whole family. Philip Schuyler and the whole family were devastated, and that's a good comment, because they were very staunch, the two of them. And I wonder if maybe Eliza was thinking about cousin Jana when she was that way.
It's like you mentioned.
She never said, I don't know. What's interesting is, you're at the mercy of what paper has survived when you're doing a book like this. And it was customary for women to destroy correspondence that they had with their husbands. Notably, Eliza did not destroy anything he wrote to her, which is interesting to me because I think she thought, I can't get rid of anything that he wrote. Everything he wrote had value, but my stuff, nobody should have it. And Martha Washington did the same thing. So, there's a lot of stuff that just didn't get preserved. And I wish
If we had those now, we pretty interesting. So those letters that we took. It would be interesting if we had those letters now.
Oh, yes, it would. It sure would, but whatever. Suzanne.
So did Eliza ever become aware of the affair in any respect?
Well, here's the thing. Interestingly, all of Angelica's letters to Hamilton were in his possession. Some of them were written to him at the office. She sent him a miniature of herself, which is something that was kind of like, it was very intimate. Just send someone a miniature. It was an intimate thing. She sent the miniature of herself to him at the office. But those letters were not seen by Eliza at home until Hamilton's death. At which point, I think she did see them. And I don't know what she thought. Interestingly, of course, he was gone and she had him to herself now. So maybe it was possible for her to just sweep all this under the rug. The letters that Hamilton had written to Angelica, however, were never seen by anybody until the 1960s. They were kept in Angelica's family. She gave them to her daughter. Her daughter gave them to, they descended through the family. And it was not until the 1960s when they were included in the papers of Alexander Hamilton that these letters ever saw the major light of day. A few of them were excerpted and permitted to be included in early family written books about the Hamiltons, but it's maybe 2 or 3, nothing more than that. I mean, the major tranche of these things never seen, which really changes your ideas of what was possible, because you realize who was going to know? They didn't know.
So one more question. Yes, sir.
When you spend that much time with those people, what kind of a sense did you get of the distance in the way they thought versus the way you think as a person living today? Because they lived in such a different world, and yet you were in their heads.
Well, you read enough of their letters that you do get a sense of the cadence of their speech. And indeed, that was one of the sort of things that I tried to do when I was thinking about how would I write this book? What would the prose sound like? Because my book about the Spanish Civil War, which is written about journalists many of them on the battlefield, many of them filing stories that are very punchy. And that book sounds like my son said when he read it, said, Mom, this book is so butch. Well, it was, it's a very butch book. It sounds, and somebody else said that it sounded sort of Hemingway-ish. Well, it did, because that's the way he wrote. That's the way those people talked, and that's the way that book sounded.
There was a kind of showbiz pizzazz to your book about Jerome Robbins.
Thank you, that, I tried to do that too. That's kind of,
All singing, all
yeah,
dancing.
and peppered with Yiddish or spritz with Yiddish or whatever. Anyway.
Well, you become a vessel for,
You do. You want it to reflect what it's about.
Well, I think we're, if there, we have time for one more question, if there is one. If not, we're finished. And gee, thanks, Amanda. That was just swell.